This video is going to be a 2-day trip report on 1P-LSD. This took place during a camping trip, or rather a cabin trip, summer of 2018. It was me, my boyfriend, and one of our friends. We got to the cabins around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we settled in, and shortly after that we took our first dose of the trip, which was 400 micrograms of 1P-LSD. So our plan was to go to a cave that was pretty close to our cabin. It was maybe a 10-minute walk. We left for the cave shortly after we took the 400 microgram dose. By the time we get to the mouth of the cave, I can already feel the effects, and at this point it's definitely been under 30 minutes. We start to walk into the cave, and I get the feeling that we're coming up a lot faster and harder than we had expected. So we walk a little bit into the cave, and we run into a group of people. There's like 3 people, and they're coming out of the cave, and we're trying to hold it together because they try to talk to us and be friendly, and we're trying to act like we're not on 400 micrograms of 1P-LSD. But eventually we get past them and we keep moving towards the cave. Visual distortions were starting a little bit at this point, but mostly I just remember the feeling of like the pre-trip anxiety. So we keep going further into the cave, and we get to a point where if we were going to go any further, we would have to get on our hands and knees and crawl. So we didn't want to go any further. Plus there was barely any light left coming from the mouth of the cave, to the point when we turned off our flashlights, it was basically completely pitch black. So we decided to sit there for a while in the darkness. The psychedelic effects really start coming on, and I can start to see visuals. I remember seeing colors even in the complete darkness of the cave. Eventually we realized we were going to be tripping pretty hard pretty soon, and I also started to get this feeling that I wasn't getting fresh air. So we didn't stay there too long. I don't really know how long it was. It was hard to keep track of how time was passing, but we do head back out the cave. I had this really strong feeling that I needed the fresh air, and I was very attracted to the mouth of the cave. I felt that I really had to get there. Going out through the cave, the stalactites and stalagmites were all like morphing, and the walls of the cave were it honestly looked like they were like closing in, and a psychedelic geometry and a psychedelic landscape was starting to reveal itself very colorfully. So we try to get out of the cave pretty fast and get back to the cabins before the peak comes on. I don't remember too much of the walk back to the cabins. All I know is that we were really determined to get back and not get distracted with anything else. So by the time we got back, the effects were really strong. We were mostly just laying there for quite a long time afterwards. At this point, the distinguishing thing that I remember was time felt very unreal, and there was a lot of interesting things happening with my time perception. I remember at one point I had gotten this impression that I was just some hippie from the 60s, and I had gotten lost or mixed up in somebody else's trip in some sort of psychedelic space-time continuum. It was just an impression that I had, and there was almost this feeling of like a deja vu feeling. Not exactly deja vu, but something similar. At some point before sunset, we redosed, so I think this was still early evening. We took another 2 hits, so another 200 micrograms of 1P-LSD. And this didn't do too much, obviously, but it did sort of extend the trip a little bit and kind of give us a second peak. I think it was during the second peak where I could see the sunset, and I remember feeling synesthesia. I could feel the colors of the sunset, I could feel the warmth, and I felt this overwhelming sense of contentment and almost desirelessness, and I was just laying, and I felt embraced by the warm colors, the pinks and the oranges of the sunset, and I felt very content. After dark, me, my boyfriend and our friend, both of them, they went to go make the fire. And if you've never stared into a fire while tripping, just know it's completely mesmerizing, and you can probably get yourself to see anything looking into those flames. So we spent a lot of time just looking around the fire, and then there's the stars. Now, the sight of the night sky without light pollution is breathtaking even while sober. On acid, it's just that much more enhanced. We spent a lot of the night just sitting in our chairs looking up at the sky. I always see this grid overlaying the night sky. It's almost like this like hexagonal, you know, these like colorful lines, and it's this hexagonal pattern, and it almost looks like this dome. Another thing about the night sky, it provokes some philosophical thought. To think that, you know, our ancestors used to see this every night, you know, before that there was all this light pollution, that you could look up to the stars and really see the beauty of the cosmos and the vastness of the universe. So we had some good philosophic, trippy conversations, you know, about, you know, the vastness of the universe and aliens, and I don't even know what specific conversations, but I know we spent a good amount of the trip just looking up at the stars. The trip went into the sunrise. I know we were still feeling the effects by the time the sun came up, but after that we did decide to try to lay down and get some sleep. I don't really know if we got any sleep, but maybe a little bit. We had a canoe float trip down the river booked for 11 a.m. in the morning. So we rested up a little bit, and by the time, you know, like 10 a.m., you know, we're eating breakfast, getting ready for the float trip. The effects have worn off at this point. As soon as we leave for the float trip, we dose again. This time my boyfriend doesn't dose, but me and our friend, me and him, we take another, I think, 2 hits of 1P. Now at this point, after the previous night of tripping, this was more like a microdose effect, or maybe more like the effect of like a half a tab, but that was perfect for what we were doing. So we get to our float. We have to take a bus with a bunch of other people going on the float up this, like, you know, there's these windy roads, and it's kind of scary, and I can start feeling the effects of this dose coming on as we're on the bus ride. When we get to the point where they drop us off at the river, we got our canoes out, you know, everybody else, you know, people get their rafts out, people get, you know, inner tubes. It's a calm river, it's not anything crazy or scary. But once we, you know, get everything in our canoe and try to get it into the river, there's 3 of us in the canoe, which me and my boyfriend had only ever done a canoe. The 2 of us, we'd never done 3. When we got into the canoe, as soon as we got in the canoe, we flipped over immediately, and everything got wet. You know, all of our stuff got wet, we got wet. We were fine. Everybody was still there, like nobody had really gotten off on their floats yet. So there was people laughing, but it was kind of funny. It was actually kind of hilarious. Anyway, we figured out and we get on our river float. The effects of the acid are really nice at this point. The river feels just really peaceful and serene. As far as visual effects, there's just a little bit of color enhancement. Maybe if I stare at something too long, it will be a bit distorted, but very mild effects, and it's very relaxing. The river just has this energy flow with it, and, you know, just standing in the river it's a really amazing feeling. You can feel this like energy with the river. So some highlights of this river trip, we see some cows cross the river at some point, and it provokes a discussion about, I wonder if there's mushrooms growing in the cow poop in the pastures that they came from. We also stopped at another cave. This cave was a bit larger, and also it was kind of prettier. It had, but it had really cold pools of water that you had to walk through, so we didn't stay in it too long, and we didn't get to go too far into the cave. We also all drank a little bit of alcohol, so it produced a nice, pleasant feeling. Mostly the river trip just felt really peaceful, but I was getting really tired. By the time we got back, it was evening, dinner time. We did eat food, but at this point, I really wanted to keep going with the trip, and I had 5 hits of 1P-LSD left. So on a whim, I just decided to take all 5 of them. That's the most acid I'd ever taken at once. Obviously, it's not going to have the effect of 500. I'm not sure exactly what effect it had, but yeah, so I took that. I remember feeling it come on. I remember the sky was, I think it was sunset again. I remember seeing the colors really kind of morph and blend into each other in the sky, and I was seeing a little bit of visual effects come on again. But I must have been completely exhausted, because I think it was before the peak of this dose would have been. I fell asleep. I fell asleep for a good few hours, and I didn't wake up until it was dark. When I woke up, I was still feeling the effects. That was the first time I'd ever fallen asleep on acid ever, but I had been going a really long time with no sleep, plus we had that whole day down the river, and I was just exhausted, I guess, and my body overrode the 500 micrograms that I had just taken. I know that it seems like a waste, and it was a waste, but at that point I was just in it for the adventure. I wouldn't recommend doing what I did. Spent the rest of the night just looking up at the stars again. It's easy to get lost staring out into the vastness of space. It's beautiful. Yeah, the next day we left, and that was it. So that was the 2-day 1P-LSD camping, cave exploring, float trip adventure. It was probably one of my most adventurous trips, which is why I chose to share it. It wasn't necessarily a very profound trip or spiritual, mystical type trip, but it was pretty intense. At least the initial 400 micrograms in the cave got a little intense. But yeah, it was a really good trip. Hope you enjoyed watching. That's it for this video.